California used to be a leader in academic achievement around the world. Today, a majority of its public school students are unable to read or do math at grade level. Dr. Arturo Delgado was the superintendent of the Los Angeles County Office of Education. He gave me an insider's perspective on how education started failing when government replaced family and faith as the engine of society. Most agree that American education is in shambles. I hope this conversation inspires all of us to fix it. So Art, thanks for coming into PragerU.
Thank you for having me here.
Here we are, two educators. I want to say we're still educators, even though one would say maybe we're former educators. Yeah. Why don't we start by having you share your background? You had a pretty big role in California education for a very long time. Yeah. So, share with me a little bit your career and how you got there.
Thank you. Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for that. The beginning of my educational career, actually prior to that, for a lot of people that don't know this, I was a traffic officer for LAPD for 8 years. And I put myself through school doing that and knew I wanted to be an educator. And so I started as a teacher, went through all the chairs, became a vice principal, a principal for 8 years. Then I became an assistant superintendent for human resources. And eventually I became the superintendent for San Bernardino City Unified School District and served there as a superintendent for 12 years for a large urban setting. That's a lifetime. Eventually I was asked to consider coming to Los Angeles County. And I was appointed by the Board of Supervisors as the superintendent for the Los Angeles County Office of Education, where I served for 5 years and then retired eventually from that office.
Superintendent, that is a massive job. Can you explain what that office looks like? What's the budget? What's the numbers? What do they actually do?
Thank you for that question, because a lot of people don't understand what the County Office of Education is all about. The County Office of Education is a service department, really, basically for all of the 80 school districts that function in Los Angeles County. And that would include LAUSD, which is the largest of the school districts, but all of the other school districts, including the San Gabriel Valley area, anything up in the Simi Valley area, all of those areas all fall under the jurisdiction of the Los Angeles County of Education. We have our own Board of Education. And the board oversees the budget and approves the budget. And it's the role of the county superintendent to be an extension of the regulations and the distribution that the state provides for each one of those 80 school districts, over 2 million students. And even though I didn't supervise the school districts individually, they all supervise themselves. The county office provides services for each one of those districts. Could be staff development, credentialing of teachers, overseeing of their facilities to make sure the facilities are adequate. We provide distribution for all of the payroll of all the school districts in the county. And so and on top of all of that, the County Office of Education had their own programs. They were the overseers of everything that happened with the juvenile court schools. So a lot of people don't know that when a young person is sent to prison, they get sent to juvenile hall, well, they still are required to get an education, a good education. And so we had 17 juvenile court schools at the time. And then we also had 2 comprehensive high schools that were like magnet programs. One was a performing arts high school. We saw some great talented folks come through, kids that were coming were amazing. And then we had a college prep high school. And in these schools, anybody could apply and be accepted into those high schools from anywhere around the county. So that was not relegated to any one area. And so that's what we had, a budget of about $1 billion back in 2011. Since that time, I think the offices has been reduced quite a bit. Anytime a school district needed assistance, the county office was called on. If the state changed their budgets, it was the role of the county office to make sure that districts understood what the implications were for them in their budgets. If a school district was overspending, let's say they gave too high of a raise to their teachers and they really couldn't afford it, it was the county office that would step in and say, you can't afford it. We're not going to approve your last negotiations in your district. We had one particular district, Inglewood, that was then taken over by the state. That was done through the county office. So it was my job as a county superintendent to say, you're not making the changes you need. So therefore, I'm going to need to go to the state and ask for a loan for your school districts, or you're not going to be able to make payroll. And when that happens, the state takes over the school district. So that's triggered by the county office. And so most of all school districts run themselves. They have their own superintendents, they have their own school boards, they have their own budgets, but we are the regulation arm of what happens in the county. And let's say a school district has a charter school that wants to be formed in their school district. The local school district says, no, we're not going to allow the charter. Well, they can appeal that to the county office. We're the first line of appeal. And so the county board then becomes the adjudicator of those kinds of issues. So the county office has a direct relationship with each one of the 80 school districts, even though we don't run them. They run themselves. But we then regulate all that goes on. And if there's anything out of line, we step in.
So would you say that the role of the county office of education is to hold LAUSD, for example, accountable, or are the different school districts accountable for how they spend their money and how they educate their students? Is that
would be fair.
assessment?
We're more like a warning track, if you will. If you know anything about baseball, when a baseball player sees a fly ball coming, the baseball field has what they call a warning track, so they can see, the baseball player, when he's running, can see that he's going to run into a wall. The county office is that warning track for school districts. You're going to get yourself, and you're going to run right into a wall if you don't change course, or if you don't slow down, or if you don't change things. And if a school district doesn't change, we're also the one who notifies the state and says, okay, they've hit the wall. You need to come in and take over.
Okay, so I have to ask the obvious question, which is California used to be, I think, number one, maybe in the world, but certainly in the United States, when it came to reading, writing, math. Academically, the state used to be very, very strong, and we have seen it go downhill year after year. Given that you're in the seat where you're holding those different counties and schools accountable, what do you think is the reason that we're seeing such deterioration in our education here? And would you agree that there's deterioration?
Well, there's definitely a problem. There's a problem. And it didn't start overnight. When I first became superintendent in San Bernardino City Schools in 1999, just before the year 2000, George W. Bush was just elected as president. And if you recall, back in 2000, George W. Bush instituted No Child Left Behind. That was a game changer for a lot of school districts, because up to that point, school districts could make their own goals. They can keep track of their own progress, and it was all localized. When No Child Left Behind came into play, there were some great things that were brought with it. One, it distinguished the number of low-income kids from high-income kids. It took into account low social economics and some of the issues that were hurting poor neighborhoods and so on. It was good in that sense. What the unintended consequence is it established a hierarchy of successful and failure schools. If you're in a poor district, you have a lot of catching up to do, but you're coming out of the gate immediately as a poor performing school district. And the press took a hold of that and had an impact on what school districts would do and how quickly they try to institute new programs. Pretty soon, school districts were flying after any program that was coming off the shelf, trying new things because they were desperate to raise those test scores. Much of it was unsuccessful. That was an unintended consequence, I think, of No Child Left Behind. I was in San Bernardino City Schools. At the time, it was the second poorest urban setting behind Detroit. And so we had a great amount of room to make up. And but we decided slow and steady was better. And so we began to put our money in to people who could help with our number one problem was reading. And then the second problem was math. And so as a result, every year we saw gains from our kids. Were they as good as our more affluent neighbor, which was Redlands, on paper? Well, no. Redlands looked like they always were ahead of us, but our progress was slow and steady. And so 2006 came around. You may recall it was a great recession that took place.
Mm-hmm.
The funding sources for school districts changed dramatically. As a superintendent back in that time, I had to cut $50 million from my budget. Where do you cut? $50 million in 1 or 2 years' time. You have to make some tough decisions. The only way you make a budget work that way is when you cut people. So the question is, who do you cut? And so we try to make some choices that were tough based on, what protected the programs in the classrooms the most. But we were unable at that point to sustain those tutorial programs, those after-school programs, those other programs that we wanted to do. So that it had an impact on what was going on with our progress. And then finally, COVID came about. And again, it was a game changer because, kids just don't learn as well if they're going to be behind a computer screen. Teachers do make a difference. I truly believe that. Teachers make a huge difference in person. And then we began to see a whole shift in what teachers wanted after the crisis was over. So, and I think that's had a major impact on our ability to recover from the losses that we had during that time.
But the numbers of the academic success, or I would say academic regress, have been going down even before COVID. And still, if you look at the amounts that are given per child in the state of California, those numbers keep going up, right? And so it's just hard for me to reconcile this idea that more and more and more money is infused into the system, but the success rate is going down. I mean, you have a barely average of 31 to 34% of basic average math capacity or capability here in California, for example. And reading, it's somewhat similar. Maybe it's in the 45 to 49% of Californian kids can actually pass a proficiency reading test. So, it doesn't seem like the system is not infusing more funds. Maybe they're not dedicating it in the right areas. Is that the issue here? Because there are new programs coming about all the time. There's additional funding that's, funneled, whether it's through the Department of Education, the local departments, money that's going into the unions. Like, additional funds are constantly called on, but we're not seeing it translate into success for our children. I want to quote something that I read recently from this is Andrew Spar, who is the president of the FEA, which is the Florida Educators Association. So basically the unions in Florida, but he's also the vice president of the AFD, the American Federation of Teachers. And so he's in both fronts. And he writes, you attack curriculum, you attack teachers and staff administrators who work in the schools, you deny funding to the schools, and you promote vouchers that benefit a few at the expense of many. Is vouchers the problem? Is choice the problem? I know that you've also spoken a little bit about the charter schools, right? There were some very few charter schools approved in the LA vicinity. I want to understand, why is that? Do you think that is true, that this is what's hurting our schools? Is school choice really the issue here? Is funding the issue here? What is the truth?
Yeah. I don't think school choice is a problem, and I don't think charters are a problem. I sat on the State Board of Education for their charter school, and at the county level, we adjudicated charters as well that wanted to start a program in any particular school district, and then were denied. So they would come to the county office, and then whether it was funny or not, I was also on the state board. If the county didn't give them what they wanted, they could go to the state board. And of course, there I sat again. So to the dismay of a lot of charter schools that came and said, "Oh, there's that guy again." But charter schools are not the problem. Remember, the charter schools are public schools. They receive public monies. They were specifically designed to provide an alternative in learning style or learning programs, to give some creative expression to how kids learn. And so it is actually a great idea. The problem is that, as I saw as a county superintendent and on the state board, is that anybody thinks that it's a simple thing to start a school. There's nothing to it. And they would come in with very, very poor plans. But so a lot of those schools were denied. But I don't think charter schools are a problem. I don't think that the funding in itself is a problem per se, because you prioritize where you're going to spend that money so that you protect what goes on in the classroom. Mm-hmm. You start getting rid of other things first. When I was in the county office, I had the privilege of having the state finance office, or through their FICMAT, what they call their FICMAT office, came knocking on my door and said, congratulations, Mr. County Superintendent. We're here to tell you that in 2 years, your office is going to be bankrupt. You will not be able to make payroll unless you cut $25 million within the next 2 years. And so one of the things that I did was I contracted an outside agency to do a full assessment of all my staff. And what I found was that we were very top heavy. We had a lot of people on our payroll that were really not serving and taking away from what was going on in the classrooms. Mm-hmm. So we did an early retirement program. 400 people took advantage of the early retirement program. And then I was able to reduce by 70% the people I hired back. Well, that instantly gave me budget now without touching the classroom. And in fact, we put more money into the classroom after that because of it. So you reprioritize. Some of the funding problems have to do with the economy. So if the economy goes down, the amount of funding goes down. It's hard to sustain good programs. It's hard to even start a good program knowing that your funding is going to come down again. And you talk about teachers. Teachers, want to get higher pay just like anybody else wants higher pay. And so when they see the good days, when the state is giving a lot of money to your school districts, well, they want a percentage of that to go to their salaries. As a superintendent, you're thinking, well, I want the greater percentage of that to go towards my programs. So that's where the negotiations really come into play. And so when I hear a quote like that says, well, you put us down and you want vouchers and you want all of these other things, it's because they're looking after their own interest as a union, which is what their job is, to look after their own interests. And the job of the superintendent is to look after the full interest of everything that goes on. And you have a good relationship with a union, you can accomplish a lot. And I had a great relationship with our union in San Bernardino and a great relationship with our unions in LA County. They fought back on some things, which is I fully expected, but we always came to an agreement as to where we need to prioritize. The union in San Bernardino in particular, they were part of my budget committee. So their leadership was there to say, well, we don't think you should cut this. We don't think you should cut that. Before I knew it, the teachers themselves were telling me, don't cut these programs. So when I cut $50 million from my budget, the teachers union was on board. They didn't get raises. I didn't get raises, but it's okay because you have to understand what your mission is. Our mission is to make sure that our district is succeeding and our kids are succeeding. So we were able to do that.
You say that the teachers union's job is not necessarily to advocate for anything else but their teachers, I guess, or the administrators. Who's advocating for the kids? Whose job is it to make sure that the programs and the resources that really the taxpayers are paying for are actually benefiting children and families?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question. And first of all, let me just say this. I don't lump the unions all in one big glob of people. Because locally, the unions that I worked with were fantastic. Mm-hmm. They're fantastic people. They really worked with me on these things. You have a hierarchy of leadership in the union, as you just read a statement about, that then gets real involved with political issues that direct the rank and file. Mm-hmm. And so that's what you hear of mostly in the press and those kinds of things. The teachers union should be speaking on behalf of kids, but they do speak on behalf of the membership that they represent. They pay dues, so they represent their membership. It's the role of the Board of Education, who gets elected by the community, to make sure they're not going to deviate from representing children. And to some degree, I'm not going to put all the blame on boards, but to some degree, I would say a lot of that falls on them to make sure they're not going to move away from what they've been elected to do. The role of the superintendent is to carry out their policies. So if the superintendent, as a superintendent, if I see the board swaying in one direction, it's my role to remind them, is that good for kids? I don't think it is, or I think it is. I need more money for this. I need more money for that. And that's where I, as a superintendent, want us to go. Now, I may get some pushback from the union. I may get some pushback from some of the board members. But if it's the right thing to do, my experience has been most people will say, okay, it's the right thing to do. Let's do it. It's when you have boards of education that have their own agenda, or you have unions that have a different agenda that want to promote more of a national agenda, that things can get rocky. So I was fortunate I didn't have that.
So when the teacher unions negotiated with you, what did they negotiate? Was it mostly just teacher salaries, or is it content of some sort? Did they? I read the NEA, the National Educators Association Agenda Platform, a couple of years ago, and it didn't seem to be focused so much on teacher salaries, nor on kids, except for what should be taught to kids. So the examples are, LGBTQ, A+, gender, ideology. There are pieces in there about how we should encourage the stacking of the courts. There are pieces in there about, gun control measures. There were pieces in there about, geopolitical issues, climate issues, all of those things. So I'm just curious, did that type of stuff come across your desk too? Were you involved in all of that? Because as a parent, I'm just trying to understand, how did we get to this point where there are limited resources, right? There's funding and there's a limited resources. And some would argue that too many resources are given, and some would argue that not enough resources are given. Nonetheless, there are resources that need to be spent. And one of the things that you described that you did really well was that you were able to identify what are the most important goals. The most important goals were that these kids can read, they can write, they can pass their math test, proficiency in things that mattered. But if the goals are not that, and the goals are the goals of larger political agendas, like the examples that I had given, then so much of the funding that we're giving are going to go towards that. And you can throw more and more and more money in that direction, but it's not going to solve what parents like me are looking to see solved.
Back in 2016, I began to see some changes happening. And it's when you get people in leadership positions that espouse to a different worldview, and they want to promote that worldview, and they're in a position of power, they can then begin to have an influence on those that work under them. As the supervisors began to change, so did the direction of what they wanted to see from our county Office of Education, that would then have an influence on what's going on your 80 school districts in the county. The local unions would bring those topics up. I found, at least in the time that I was there, I found that salaries was the main issue. And anything could be worked out without a lot of compromise unless it was about salaries. So if you gave salaries increases, you could pretty much, agree on the rest, and the rest can wait. Administration wasn't taking the lion's share for something else that was a pet project, or whatever the case that they felt was happening. But it's changed since, as you well know. It's changed quite a bit. And so the pressure is bigger, I think. I still meet with a consortium of superintendents for Southern California and Northern California. Even though I'm retired, I'm still a member of that association. And I have the opportunity to hear at the roundtable what is on the mind of the superintendents who are currently in place. And honestly, I don't hear as much about the social issues around the table than I do about the negotiations issues. How much money are you offering, and what are the teachers asking for? And so that tells me it's still about the money in terms of how the money will be distributed. We are nonetheless seeing some alarming examples of things that are going on around us. We have a teacher in the Jurupa Unified School District who was fired because she refused to go along with some of the gender preference issues that are going on that we're hearing a lot about. Chino Valley Unified School District that's making new policies as it relates to their curriculum, and the governor stepping in and doing things that. So we are seeing an escalation of hands-on from government and from other agencies to try to force what's going on in our schools upon our schools. So it's at that part. I'm glad I'm not necessarily in charge anymore for that reason. Yeah,
really, really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, so I brought some examples that I wanted to show you, and I know, I mean, you probably could have brought another 100 books like these because you're so in it. But these are things that, you know, I've picked up, our audience has sent in. This is the 1619 Project, Critical Race Theory, basically now teaching children that we're not all created equally. Now that, you know, you should judge people based on their color, last name, etc. This one is an effort to teach literacy through the lens of this anti-racist curriculum, which basically means it's kind of Marxist ideology that if you're teaching literacy, you should make sure that you generate a discussion about racism, again, division, really telling people that if you're born of a certain skin color, you're behind on others. This is the gender. This is an 8th grade reading assignment about gender fluidity that is found in a lot of the schools. 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade. This book, Melissa, endorsed by Scholastic, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Scholastic.
Oh, yeah.
There is
They've been around a long time.
A long time. There's an educator in this country who doesn't know Scholastic, so they actually gave them an award. This is a story about a child who was born George, a boy, and very quickly decides that born in the wrong body, wants to be Melissa. If you take a look at the font, what would you say this reading level is? What?
3rd grade, perhaps?
Third, 4th grade. I saw it in 5th grade curriculum. So how is this stuff happening when we know that our kids can barely read or do math? How is this making it into the schools? Are the teachers themselves not overwhelmed enough with what it is that they need to teach? And what I've also noticed, these specific examples, they're not separate lessons. So when I was teaching, sometimes there would be these things through social emotional learning. And so they would have time for social emotional learning and all kinds of things would pop up as teachers would just find stuff on the internet to make things interesting. And so discussions. Now it's actually becoming part of literacy. So if you have a literacy hour and you're teaching kids how to read, the books that are used are these kinds of books. How is that happening? Is it a top-down thing? Is it coming from the school districts? Is it coming from the teacher colleges? Is it coming from the makers of the content themselves? Why do you think this is escalating? And also, I agree with you very, very fast. I think we both agree that for a very long time, there have been problems in education. But the type of problems that we're seeing today are at a whole nother level, right? So I'm curious if you have any thoughts as to why is this happening?
I do have some thoughts on it. And I need to explain it this way. There's several prongs to this. When I used to speak as a superintendent, I used to go around and talk to people about the institutions that can change the community in one generation's time. And there were 4 institutions. The first is the family institution. And so if you have a family that nurtures their children, that provides a safe place for them, provides room and shelter, encouragement and support, and you have a family that does that, you have the beginnings of a good community. I think most people would agree with that. Unfortunately, what are we seeing with our families today? Lots of broken homes, single parent families, kids being raised with absent parents. And, or you have parents that are so busy working to make ends meet. They're not providing for their children like they at one time used to. And but nonetheless, the family institution is critical. Okay. But it's changed. The second institution that I like to talk about is the faith-based institutions. And the reason why I like to talk about that is because faith-based institutions have access to full families. And so it used to be full families would go together to their church or synagogue, and they would learn together, they would pray together, and they would learn a value system based on a foundational word, okay? And they would go to school with that. And they would go to play with that. And so you would have faith-based institutions that are a vital part. Now you get the families together with a good faith-based institution, you've got a greater chance of a wonderful community to be formed in one generation's time. The problem with the faith-based institutions today is that we're seeing even the faith-based institutions are becoming homogenized to, instead of providing a foundation that comes from a word of truth, they provide a more homogenized whatever the crowd wants to hear, which is more pleasing to the crowd, so that their institution can thrive and can survive in a changing society. And so even our churches today are remiss in doing what they should be doing. They should be feeding the hungry. They should be providing shelter for those without shelter. They should be loving on people and providing for them good, excellent foundation for moral values. So a lot of churches are now putting that by the wayside. The third institution is our government institutions. Our government institutions are supposed to be protecting the innocent, punishing the evil. And we're seeing the government begin to do something different than that. The first two institutions were formative because they form our basis for society. The government should be reflective of those first two. But what we're seeing now is that the government now is no longer reflective of what the home wants or what the churches are saying. They are now forming their own value system. And this is where some of the things that you're hearing coming from people of leadership that say, you know, you want to take away this and you want to take away that, whether it's charter schools or whether it's vouchers or what have you, is because there's a push that government should be the answer to everything. And in that sense, government now becomes the formative institution as opposed to reflective of what society needs and wants. And so the fourth one I say is education because I'm an educator. And as an educator, I say education is supposed to support the home. And the parents are the first teachers of what goes on for their kids. And, you know, there's a verse in scripture that says, if you train a child in the way that they should go, when they're old, they won't depart from it. Find that in the book of Psalms. We've kind of lost that in education. What educators are saying now is, no, parents need to trust us. We will tell you what's important. We will show you what the value system is. Well, if the churches aren't teaching the value system, the government is going to be imposing their value system on, and the government pays your education programs. You're going to have a value system that's going to bring these kinds of materials into the picture because we've lost a certain fabric of society. And so our society will change in one generation's time if we don't see a shift in those areas. So that's why I get still excited, even as a retired administrator, educator, to remain faithful to espousing those values that I think drove me to do what I did in leadership and education.
Mm-hmm. You know, you say education, and I'm an educator too. We constantly say here, education got us into this mess. Only education can get us out. When you talk about these four major catapults for good and for bad in our society, I can't help but go back into my time when I studied education and I got my master's. And I think about like the lessons of Pablo Freire, for example, which really is so contradictory to what you just described. This idea that education should be generative and this idea that children should go to school so that they become young activists. Those are the things that were really laced in what we studied as educators. And now when I look back at it, I look at these things, I hear people like you, I reflect on what my kids are learning and just schools around America in general. I realize that, so many of us as teachers have not heard what you just described as the 4 pillars of what makes for a better society. We mostly heard, well, tell parents that that they can bathe their kids, feed their kids, make sure that they go to sports, and drop them off at school because the government school knows what's best. And that philosophy really does come in many of these education schools that we've been sending our teachers to. I don't think that teachers come out of education schools thinking the way you speak, that we got to strengthen the family, that we need to strengthen the community via religious institutions and the church. I mean, you talk about that element of the church, and the first thing that comes to my mind is, 1962, there was no more prayer in schools. 1963, there is no teaching of the Bible in schools. I must have gone through so many lessons that have taught me that as a teacher, we can't even mention Bible in schools, right? This separation of supposed church and state. And so now there are no more Bibles in schools. Do you think that's part of the problem, that we pulled the Bible out of schools entirely?
Well, let me correct one thing, is that the Bibles are not out of schools, and we can have Bibles in our schools. There is nothing that's, in fact, it's encouraged by our California.
Even public schools?
Even in public schools. The California curriculum standards teach or say that we are allowed to teach the Bible as literature, number one, but to teach the personages of the Bible, who Jesus Christ was, who Paul was. We can teach those things in the school, and that's part of our state curriculum. The problem is, and in terms of prayer, we're a very pluralistic society. And so, what do you say to the Muslim? What do you say to the atheist? What do you say to who want to also then introduce their brand of whatever goes on? So there's a balance that needs to be taking place. But to say that there's a complete separation of church and state is not an accurate statement, because there isn't. Government is not designed to be hostile towards religion. And what we're finding is those that espouse to the separation of church and state often are really saying, you need to take religion completely out of society, which is hostile. And there's the difference. You can't be hostile to faith-based institutions or to kids who want to pray in school, or to the Christian club that wants to form itself, who want to pray at the pole, the flag pole. You can't be hostile, because then the government is impeding the First Amendment, which gives us freedom of religion. And so the key for me, honestly, Marissa, is to stay engaged, to keep people informed of what the government actually is able to do, what you're able to do legally, and to still maintain the letter of the law. And it's not as bad as people think if they just study a little bit closer.
So why don't we launch into that? We talked about a lot of problems.
Yeah.
I might still bring up a few more problems.
Okay.
But let's talk about some of the solutions that you've come up with, right? I know that faith is something that obviously you're very passionate about, and education is something you're passionate about. So what are you working on?
Right. Yes. Well, when I was a public official as a county superintendent, of course, I knew that proselytizing kids was not allowed. I knew that. And so, yet I was a Christian man who wanted to show by example what integrity meant, what honesty meant, and all these other things. And hopefully I was able to maintain that. I survived it for 17 years, so I guess nobody felt I was lying to them about anything. So now, as a retired superintendent, I still come in contact with a good number of educators who espouse to be Christians, or espouse to have some faith background, who want to know, here's what's happening in my school district, and I don't know where to go to get help with this. Or I don't know if I'm allowed to do A, B, or C, and I feel like I'm all alone. I don't know if there's others like me who are asking these questions. And so I was part of a committee once that talked about What's happening in education at this time, and what about the changing morals that are going on, and what do we do about this, at this point in time? And I had one teacher who had an impact on me who said, there's a lot of good things going on right now in our public school setting that people don't know about, and I wish they did, and I wish there was a way for us to get that word out. So that birthed the Association of Christian Administrators and Educators, which is the association that I'm founding, that is designed to network Christians, actually anybody of faith-based background, to understand that they're not alone, and to make it a mission to do three things: to support them, encourage them, and to equip them. And so that's what the ACAE, which is Association of Christian Administrators and Educators, is designed to do, to support them through networking, so they get to know that, hey, I work in LAUSD, but I don't know any other people who think like I think. How do I get a hold of them? Well, the network would help them do that. So that gives them support, and then you can have people throughout California talking to each other and seeing, okay, up here in Northern California, we're doing this. What are you doing down there? And so in that sense, then we're encouraging educators who want to have that solid foundation, and encourage them through not only the networking, but then also linking them to other organizations that are doing great work already ahead of us, that we're not going to do directly, but we can link them and say, just come to our network, and you can simply link to these others that will give you legal help. They'll give you materials besides these that will be substantially teaching good morals and good, wholesome curriculum for kids. Or someone says, here's how you do it. Here's what it looks like in your district. Here's what it could be. So we would hold seminars to equip them to understand, here's a seminar you can attend. We're going to meet and greet in your area. I'm going to come out. I'm going to go talk to your folks. I'm going to let them know what's happening in Southern California. I'm going to let people in Southern California what's going on in Northern California. And in that sense, ACAE is designed to be a networking for faith-based educators who are still in the public setting, and or in sectarian schools. They could be in Catholic school. They could be in a Christian school. It could be any school, sectarian. And we want them talking to each other. Don't feel alone. You're not alone. They're more than people understand. A part of that, Marissa, is that we then team up with organizations like this one in every state in the country. So we began to form a national organization called Association of Christian Administrators. And there's a group of people already doing that work. Started in Oklahoma and Illinois. And now we have as many as 6, probably 7 new members to the association. California now, through my foundation, is a part of that association. But we do expect that in order for us to get the kind of word out that PragerU is doing, we need to do this grassroots, and we need to involve everyday people that are doing the work on the ground and get them talking to each other so that the word gets out. With PragerU's word gets out quicker. Gateways to Better Education, that does great work right now. We've already worked with them, get their word out. And I think in that way we help each other. And then we can change some of the course of what's going on. We can change it. So I believe that.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that you just said that really resonate with me. One is, I appreciate you correcting me earlier and reminding me that it is okay to bring the Bible into the classroom, because many teachers like me think that it's simply not, or we've been scared. We've been made to be scared. And it's true that when you're alone, or when you're made to think you're the only one, it's a lot harder to have courage. But when you are actually united with other people in values, and you know that you're walking in lockstep with others who have your back, who hold the truth, who are willing to be there for you, it's a lot easier to do good. And it's a lot less scary. And it's in many cases what we try to do here at PragerU with Prager Force and the parents and viewers, et cetera. And the other thing that you bring up that makes me think about some of the work that we're doing here, and similar to yours, is that many people are realizing that this kind of stuff needs to come out of the schools, right? We're realizing that we have to step in, we have to fight. And on the government level, we're pushing for elected officials who are actually listening to us. And there are a lot of people now who are running on education platforms saying that they're going to do better. But even once they're elected and they're sitting there, a vacuum is created, because if they pulled this stuff out, well, they still need the great teachers who understand what their rights are. They still need great material, math, literature, all of those examples, right? We need to take the bad stuff out and put good stuff in. And so organizations like yours are essential, because it doesn't matter how many elected officials we elect. If they're sitting there at a desk and they don't have the great teachers to empower, the great content to provide to students, they're not going to be able to do their job. Right? And
Right.
it's like anybody who is running on these education ideas, these education platforms, they need organizations like yours to step in and actually carry out the task.
Yeah. I think educators, it's one of the highest callings you can have, I believe. That's not my personal opinion. There are a lot of other high calling, careers. But if you're an educator, that's a very high calling, I believe. And you have to have a sense of mission to do it. Mm-hmm. And if you do have a sense of mission, you believe what you're really doing is benefiting society, and you really want to be a difference maker, this is a high calling for an educator. But you also have to be equipped to do it right. And so where do they get that training from? If they're not getting it from their current institution, well, where can they go to get that kind of training? So we have to equip them to do the right thing. And that helps their commitment levels, because then they're committed to doing the right thing. They now know how to do it. And then the only thing lacking is the courage to do it. And ACAE is hopefully going to be helping them to equip and to give them the courage, because they won't feel alone in what they're doing anymore. They'll know that there are others doing similar work and doing it well, and sharing it across the board. And people in Chicago are going to know the people in Los Angeles, what they're doing to make that happen. And hopefully there's more talking that goes on. Our leadership begins to see a different picture of what society at the whole wants. The government shouldn't be telling us what to do, but they should be responding to what the communities want. And if they're doing it well, then we have a good government. When they're not doing that well, then we have some problems. We have lots of problems. Yeah. And it's very divisive. One last thing I meant to say earlier, I just finished reading a book called Bonhoeffer. You probably know who Bonhoeffer is. And Texas, a book that he wrote about Bonhoeffer, and a very fascinating book in the sense that you begin to see step by step the strategy of society that wants to change towards a more socialistic, more Marxist way of thinking, and you see it step by step through World War II and what the Germans were doing, and to their schools. And that was one of the first things they went after, was the education of our children. So I'm not surprised when I see this kind of thing going on. I'm not surprised when I see government saying this is what you shall do, because this is a playbook. And if we're aware of it, at least we understand we can't let history repeat itself. We have to do something better. And if we know that, then what excuse do we have for not doing something about it? And so that's what I think PragerU is doing. Yeah. And those that work under PragerU, and that's what we're going to try to do with ACAE.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Bonhoeffer. I printed this thing out. This is actually a document from the Naked Communist that was written in 1958. There's a man by the name of Skousen who actually kind of digested the original document in 1963. And it's essentially the 45 declared goals of the communist takeover of America. And it outlines how it would, essentially take over all kinds of institutions. A very, very big part of it is how they would do it through education. And you would think that this is just an absolute playbook for what we're seeing right now. I'll just read some of these things to you. Do away with all loyalty to oaths, get control of the schools, use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda, soften the curriculum, get control of teachers' associations, put party line in textbooks, gain control of all student newspapers. use technical decisions of the courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting magazines, motion pictures, radio, present homosexuality, degeneracy as promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Here's another one. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in schools on the ground that it violates the principles of separation of church and state. This is from 1963. This is the translation. So either it's the playbook or somebody was able to read into the future. Discredit American Constitution, discredit the American founding fathers, support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of culture, education, social agencies, and welfare programs. People can find this document. We'll link to it so they can go into the different details. Belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history on the ground that it was only a minor part of the big picture. Give more emphasis to Russian history since the communists took over. Infiltrate, gain control of more unions, dominate the psychiatric profession and use mental health laws as a means of gaining coercive control, discredit the family as an institution, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents, attribute prejudice, mental blocks, and retarding of children to suppressive influence of parents, create impressions that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of American tradition. And this list goes on and on. I encourage people to go and look it up for themselves so they know that I'm not making this up. But this is the type of stuff that we are seeing today.
And we saw that in the 1930s and 1940s during World War II, all the same steps that were taken.
Yeah.
So we just have to be aware of it. And I will say this, I know that there are a lot of great people in public education. I know them.
Well, you are here.
They're good people. But I mean, those that are still on the firing line doing the work that they're supposed to be, our superintendents, when I see them, they're dedicated professionals that want to do great things. They want to do good things. I can't tell you how impressed I am with them. They're very impressive in what they want to do and how they want to go about doing it. Teachers are great. I always love my teachers. They love kids. I mean, the union piece of this, there's some issues there, especially with the leadership and what they're trying to do and the influence that they're trying to do with government and where the money goes and those types of things. But I absolutely loved working with our teachers. I never found them to be disingenuous about what they really want to do. As a man who is a man of faith, our role isn't to condemn and to put them in a bad light. Our job is to love them, but yet, the scripture says to speak the truth in love. And so that's what I hope to be able to do, is to speak the truth in love and have them understand they're not the enemy. And I'm not the enemy either. And we want to do something that's good for society overall. We want to see a generation. I want to see my grandkids thrive, and I want to see their grandkids thrive. So that's what this is about.
Same, me too. And I agree. There are many really great teachers out there who are looking for camaraderie. They're looking for great resources, and they're looking to do good for their students, their communities. Many of them are parents too, right? Of course, they're great. And they have been, I guess, held hostage in this bizarre political atmosphere that really the teachers, the children, and the families are not benefiting from. So I'm really glad that you're a fellow warrior for truth.
Thank you.
And for goodness. And, no matter what type of evil we're fighting, we have to just keep going.
And I want to encourage parents to keep the fight.
Yeah.
Because I am impressed with our parents. They're stepping up.
Yeah. And it's our job as parents to hold all of these administrators accountable.
Yeah. We need to re-engage our parents. They're not the problem.
Yeah.
The parents are not the enemy. They are the solution to all of this. And we need to encourage our parents' participation, not discourage them. So I I admire our parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any final advice to parents listening or educators listening, or how did you do such a great job with your son, who I know, happen to know? So,
Well, I'll give the credit to my wife because while I was going through my training as to become a teacher, to become qualified, to get my credentials and so on, she was the one that was raising our two. We had two. And she did, as you can see, I think, a terrific job. And our son, of course, has a personality that sometimes I need to calm down a little bit, but he understands something I think is real critical. And that is that relationships are important. Mm. And he does that in every aspect of what he does. And it pays off because people get to know him, he gets to know them, and it makes people feel comfortable. And before you know it, he's successful in everything he touches. So I'm proud of him. He is a good example of someone that put a lot of work into what he did, even when his dad would say, "Hey, when are you going to get paid for this?" But he knew what he was doing, and so I'm very proud of him. I'm glad to say that. But yes, I do credit his mother because she is to this day still the anchor. Mm. And so I appreciate her. So I take very little credit for it. I just try to maintain that whatever I have, I've been given. Mm. And so what I've been given, I'm a steward of. And so he's one of those things. And so is my daughter. So I'm very happy to say that. Yeah.
Well, you're a humble man, but having a good father and a father who is involved in the home is very, very significant. Yeah. And you just being there, I'm sure, has been a blessing for your family and for your kids. So thanks for what you're doing for America's kids. And thanks for all your work.
Thank you,
It's
Marissa.
great to have you on.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.